Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today we'll be doing a review of the 1861 autobiography by Harriet Jacobs, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, written by herself. Harriet Jacobs, born around 1813 in Edenton, North Carolina, died the 7th of March 1897 in Washington, D.C. Born to enslaved parents, Jacobs' first owner died when she was 13, and she was sold to another man, a doctor named James Norcom, who, among other things, threatened and indeed abused, including sexually abusing, Jacobs numerous times. After entering another relationship with a white man and having 2 children with said man, Jacobs escaped captivity in 1835 by hiding in the roof of her grandmother's house, where she would stay for the better part of 7 years before fleeing to the Northeast. Having learned to read at a young age, her literacy helped her become a popular and relatively outspoken figure in New York's abolitionist circles, even while still evading pursuit from Norcom. Her autobiography was written and published over the course of 8 years, appearing in print on the eve of the Civil War, and even with publishing it under a pseudonym, her identity was known by many, and her renown was pretty massive during the peak of the war. And again, as a reminder for people, this is the 4th and final of the narratives collected in the Classic Slave Narratives edited by Henry Louis Gates Jr., really would highly recommend picking this up. Again, all 4 of these were absolutely spectacular reads, and the Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Jacobs was hardly an exception to that. It's interesting that Jacobs didn't initially want to be the one writing this. She actually wanted it done by a professional author, specifically Harriet Beecher Stowe, who was fresh off the success of her novel Uncle Tom's Cabin. But when Stowe sort of shunned her, Jacobs decided to go ahead and get the job done herself. I bring that up in part because more so than any of the other narratives that we've read and talked about during this week, this one really feels like it borrowed from the writing styles and approaches of popular fiction. Jacobs not only approaches her characters from kind of that standpoint, I think they all kind of would work as very fully fleshed fictional characters, but she goes so far as to add dialogue and direct quotes to these interactions between people, and that decision alone makes a lot of these individual scenes pop out super vividly. Sometimes the dialogue feels so vivid that it's hard to believe this is a real narrative and not a fictional one. In fact, people actually doubted its legitimacy for years until in-depth research by a group of scholars proved that, nope, Jacob's story is real, and it happened to her, not anybody else. I talked about it in the Mary Prince video, but the treatment of female slaves in particular is a context that if you've only read Frederick Douglass's narrative, you are going to lack. And if Prince's book alludes to wrongdoing specific to her sex, Jacobs is full on discussing rape and patterns of rape and how James Norcom treated her as a possession and told her that she was. Describing her relationship with the man she had her children with as a means of escape is also enlightening in a dark sort of way, and he is portrayed as sympathetic to her trials, but even then you can feel that sense of distrust even when he buys her son and says he intends to set him free. The son doesn't trust him, and nor does Jacobs, really. Again, nobody who has any part in this trade comes off well, no matter how sympathetic they may be, and Jacobs isn't willing to share any forgiveness other than an occasional sentence here and there, perhaps. But yes, specifically feminine servitude is a huge point of emphasis that Jacobs wants to make, really trying to differentiate and set the story apart from the many male narratives that existed at the time and would not have touched on these subjects. There's both a sentimental novel and an adventure novel laced into this book. The adventure comes in the plot itself and how Jacobs manages to plan her escape and then the acquiring of her freedom. And again, the sentimental piece comes in Jacobs' writing choices, which really hone in on her emotional experiences while also acting as these very strong pieces of advocacy. Her way with words and being able to manipulate those into persuasive, strongly phrased arguments adds this extra heaviness and grit to an autobiography that is otherwise written with a sort of classical elegance. Maybe it's a premature word to use, but it's all very cinematic, and it feels like a fully completed narrative in the way that some of these other ones don't. Even the Douglas one sort of ends inconclusively after his escape. And I should say that pointing this out isn't a way of saying that my expectation is a complete narrative, a completely finished narrative, because it achieves a maximum level of entertainment or some bullshit. I'm not coming here to be entertained. I bring this up to try and understand why this book is so effective and why her telling of her story resonates on an emotional level. It's terrifically well done, and it does display a strong awareness of how to craft a story. And when you're telling a story that is not just meaningful to you, but is intended to make a compelling argument, larger argument on some level, that is super important. I will admit that going into this, the only slave narrative I had read was that of Frederick Douglass. And as much as that stands apart from everything else on a lot of levels, I think Harriet Jacobs' story does the same thing in its own right. I think it also stands apart. Not only are you getting a female perspective, which is crucial to understanding the story, but it's a very different type of storytelling from Douglas, even if there are obvious overlaps with some of the themes. My opinion? Read the two in tandem as complements to one another, and you'll find yourself with a much fuller understanding of the era, or as much as you can from reading two books. And that's it. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, more reviews are to come. Tell a friend as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.